December of 1996, the then Minister at the time abolished charges for those getting public water. Now, that struck a chord with me because we were living in rural Ireland. We supplied our own water, we paid our own contribution, and the contribution was quite hefty at the time.
As I say, times were difficult back then, you know, with no water in their homes or on their farms or business or whatever, you know, so it took us toll for a while, but we got there. The main thing in all this, of course, is finance.
In 1994, I discovered there was a very serious problem. And I discovered that the water coming out of the tap was contaminated with E. coli. And it was quite a health hazard, and we had seen quite a number of cases of gastroenteritis in visitors. The local people were immune, I think, but of course, older people, babies, people with cancer, of course, would be very prone to gastroenteritis, and we had our fair share of that, particularly during the summertime when we'd have lots of visitors around.
Policy decisions should never be taken by government in the run-up to a general election. And the government at the time, in the late 1990s, overnight, without consultation with anybody, not even with officials, the Minister and the Cabinet abolished water charges.
Data from the 1991 census tells us that 38% of the Irish population were responsible for sourcing their own water. The government's abolishment of water charges had no effect on private or group water schemes who still paid for their own water.
Virtually no investment for cleaning water for those years before the Federation became active, before the Federation was set up.
There's a big problem here. You forgot about 500,000 people that depend on their own well, depend on privately sourced group water schemes, or depend on group schemes that are sourced from the local authority supply networks. And that was completely forgotten about. And how can I say it? The shit hit the fan.
Controversy over water charges brought ordinary people onto the streets and into the courts.
So if I lived in a town, I got my water for free. I got my sewage dealt with for free. There was a mutual aid. They weren't built on member contributions, whereas the schemes, there had been a member contribution. There had been rates up until the late 70s in Ireland, but the rates were done away with. Essentially, the taxpayer, the central exchequer, was supporting water supply in the urban area, and that wasn't happening in the rural area. The group water scheme changed that totally.
The National Federation I'd never have started but for a group and got together, sat down in a hotel room and put it all together. Like those people had no base to go on, but they had the energy to start.
So he announced the abolition of public charges for the towns and villages, but there's no similar scenario for the group scheme sector. So we were effectively left out in the cold. So how would we collect water charges if it was free in the towns where our brothers and sisters had it? So suppose it was a coming together in reaction to that, and like many successful organisations, that there has to be a kick-off point, and that was it, to look for parity. We called it parity of esteem. That sort of language has been used elsewhere at the time. So we lobbied hard, the politicians at that stage, and that's when the Federation came into being formally. We didn't set out the first day to say we must form a national organisation. It just evolved from lobbying that was taking place to try to get parity with the public schemes, yeah.
At the very first meeting held in Barnajarrag in January 1997, where I was nominated to join the Galway Committee of the National Federation of Group Water Schemes.
And would you believe it, that day, because I asked a question or two, I ended up being vice chairman coming out the door, having promised my wife before I left that morning I wouldn't be involved in anything.
When I was growing up, we had the mehel. Everybody wanted to help each other. You could feel that there was a group set up there that was going to be, you know, the backbone of something that was going forward. You know, and you had a voice then, we'll say, to go in and speak with government officials and to have plan A or plan B, whichever would be the best working forward. And I have to say that the Federation group water schemes, you know, without that, I think a lot of those schemes would have maybe fallen apart.
The move towards cooperative organisation was, I think, a key moment in the development of the group water scheme sector. Until then, most schemes were established from the 1960s as trusteeships, and if nothing else, the cooperative structure provided a legal protection to those, the organisers of group water schemes.
At its heart, there's a pity definition of a cooperative as being a business in which the user owns, controls and benefits from the delivery of a good or a service. And in the case of the group water schemes, it was very much first nature to the participants to understand that they were the beneficiaries and they were the people who would use the service, and to use it and to benefit from it they needed to control it. And thus the National Federation of Group Water Schemes was founded, and at individual levels and at county levels representative groupings of group water schemes were also founded.
The fundamental requirement to any successful cooperative is that the interests of the individual members are better met by working together than by working individually.
Having the cooperative structure is a great benefit to that, I feel. If you have lots of schemes and then a national body, it gives you great negotiation power, the power of negotiation.
Well, ICOS is one of the oldest still surviving rural bodies in the country. The ICOS stands for the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, founded by Horace Plunkett back in 1893 with the specific role of energising and giving purpose and direction to rural society, particularly rural farmers, but also their wives, their partners, and all through promoting cooperative values and the cooperative ideal. The idea that you yourself, in collaboration with your neighbours, could get things done effectively, things that you needed getting done and that nobody else was willing or capable of doing that for you. And that, of course, was the ethos of group water schemes as well, come the 1960s and 1970s. They wanted a service, there was no one willing to provide it, so they said, we'll provide it ourselves.
It's 25 years since the Federation was incorporated as a cooperative, and the cooperative organisation, the structure itself, it epitomises everything that's good about the rural water sector. It's community owned, community run, it's people coming together and having a proper governance structure in place for the benefit of everybody within the community. Extremely democratic in how it's organised, and it really has been the cornerstone of the group water scheme sector since its formation.
The Rural Water Programme effectively was an investment programme to bring the water into the drinking water standards, because Ireland at this stage, we were aware from our discussions with the department that there was a case being pursued possibly against Ireland in the European Court of Justice.
People like Sean Clerkin took a hugely active role in the work of the Rural Water Monitoring Group. The fundamental challenge that we were faced with as an entity concerned the quality of group water schemes. An action had been taken by the European Commission against Ireland regarding the quality of group water schemes, and Ireland lost that particular case. They were essentially under instructions from the European Commission to bring the quality of group water schemes up to a level where it was safe, where the water supply was clean and usable. And as I recall, there were 550 water schemes designated in the country then where the quality was deficient.
So out of that, I suppose, came the recognition, first of all, that there is a sector out there called the private group water schemes that have been doing Trojan work for years, but it was never recognised, certainly never recognised by government. You know, they were forgotten about because they did it themselves, they didn't bother anybody, they got their grants, and they were left to their own devices.
The challenges that faced the sector were perhaps different in different parts of the country. So there were some areas that relied on semi-private sources, there were areas that were purely private sources, there were areas where some schemes were partially taken over, others thought they were taken over and weren't. So there was a whole myriad of challenges to be addressed there.
By 1998, there was an urgent need for sustained capital investment to improve the quality of drinking water provided by the group water schemes. The Rural Water Programme was established by government as a means of providing funding to that sector for large projects. The next 25 years would see more than €1 billion invested through the Rural Water Programme.
We started taking steps to try and upgrade the water, and in fact the trustees had done their very, very best, but they were getting no place. And we discovered that this was a very common problem because we hit the airways, and then we discovered that so many places all over Ireland were in the same boat as we were, literally. And over the Midwest Radio, which I think played a large part in it all, we became household names in the west of Ireland because we were on all the time about the quality of the water and how bad the quality of water was, and the difficulty trying to get money, and how difficult it was for people to do what they would really like to do, and that's provide quality water for the people of Ireland.
Every scheme is different, as we know, and we've a lot of schemes in Ireland, and you have different lake sources, you have groundwater, surface water, and not all treatment systems were going to be the same.
Yeah, I think the early days in the Federation, probably just before I started, it was clear that, you know, there was such a job of work to be done. There was so many issues to be resolved that, you know, schemes individually were not going to be able to achieve this. I don't think the Federation individually on its own going out, you know, was going to be able to help everyone. It was local authorities had a new significant role to play as part of the devolution process, and the department obviously is the key funders. So key to all of that and achieving everything that has been achieved and continues to be achieved by the sector came down to a partnership approach, and that was really essential.
The National Rural Water Monitoring Committee then was set up to advise the Minister. We were very much involved in that. We had representatives on it, representatives from the farming community, the ICA and other rural bodies, so that collectively we were focusing on the need and where the best value for your buck would be found. And I think at that stage there were three possibilities emerged, and they later became national sort of aims and objectives, which was for treatment purposes, either you would connect to a public mains if there was one close by, some of them that were in very poor conditions, or what we call stand-alone, if the scheme was big enough and could be in treatment, or more importantly then, as it turned out, was a collection of schemes coming together to install treatment facilities by way of a single contract, what we call Design, Build, Operate, or DBO.
There were hundreds and hundreds of group water schemes that had to be brought into compliance, and for each of those to have gone to the market, to have made the case for a treatment system, and that it just would have taken a millennia to actually achieve that. And what bundling did was it provided the numbers needed to bring the price down.
That's why it's important to have things like the Federation, so no one scheme is alone in this journey. The Federation is there to be there as a support and guidance.
Having seen the success of the DBO approach, we could see that this could be equally applied to Ireland.
Essentially, the design of a treatment system capable of dealing with the raw water being supplied by the group water scheme, and the build that the company that was going to stand over this system would build the treatment plant, and then they would operate it as well during the lifetime of the contract. And the Federation managed to secure a 20-year contract in the case of DBOs, because it had to be of sufficient longevity to provide that certainty to the contractors themselves and to the schemes, that there was a long-term commitment to that there. And I think that it was, to say it was a game changer, it was the key moment in the management, the operational management of group water schemes, because it acknowledged the fact that whereas schemes and their operators and their boards might have the enthusiasm for the scheme, the commitment to it, they didn't necessarily have the scientific or technical background that was needed, you know, and water is a technical issue, and the treatment of water is a technical issue, even if it's simple chlorination, simple disinfection. You know, there is a technical demand there, and the DBO process, and particularly in the surface water zones, water is particularly complex. It can change every day of the year, depending on climate, depending on atmospheric and storm events. Water can change, so you needed systems that were adjustable. So again, bringing in a competent professional to do that job. Essentially what you were asking the schemes to do was to put a chef into the kitchen.
A voluntary effort was no longer sufficient. What was needed was a business model.
Schemes were being invited to join a bundle, and first of all, trying to sell the idea of a company coming in and treating the water. It took a long process and a lot of late night meetings and early morning meetings and all day meetings to convince people to go down this road.
But several times I saw the debate turning right around by a young mother standing, excuse me, can you guarantee me if we go down this road that you're recommending, which was the design, build, operate and to amalgamate with neighbours, will we have water 24 hours a day? Will it be fit for drinking? And will my children be able to avail of that? And oftentimes the meeting turned right around on that basis, put the motion to the floor and carried, and so that's a good night's work. Now, more often than not, you might have to return a second night because they weren't as convinced. But I should say that the department were extremely adamant that there would be no deviation from that policy. So we had to bring that message to the schemes. You'll either join now and get 100%, mind you, they're being offered 100% funding for the treatment plant, so nobody was going to have to pay other than maybe to buy a site to make a 15% contribution. It's almost too good to be true, they would say. Where's the catch? What's involved in it? But because the European Court of Justice case was moving along, the department and the state had to ensure this was, so they were extremely flexible, the department, in ensuring that there was sufficient funding there at all times. Well over €1 billion was spent during that period on treatment facilities. Yeah.
There were considerable efficiencies to be found if there was a particular scale, not just in terms of the capital cost, but also the potential to share running costs and operational costs as time went on. So again, a process to go through. Well, what was the appropriate size for a particular scheme? Would the challenges that a scheme faced in a particular location, like the type of source, like the topography, would that impact on what was a reasonable size of scheme to travel forward on their own? So again, conversations around would amalgamations work, and if so, how would the amalgamated entity fit together, tender together, work together into the future? So it was a mix. Some of the smaller ones, particularly amalgamated, but there were many other medium and large-sized group schemes that worked their way through the process, tendered on their own, and are still operating as separate group schemes right to the present day.
If the Federation brought a project to the department, they usually ran with it. And so did the council, of course. So, no, the Federation was the go-through body really back in those days. If you had the Federation recommending you, you're coming an extra line anyway, you know.
The private sector are very good at doing certain things that the public sector can't do. And, you know, it's best leave it to the experts to do it. And that resulted in the whole DBO approach that was piloted in County Monaghan, and where 10 group schemes in Monaghan embraced it and showed it, damn it, this is the way to go, and it works. And that was the model then that was replicated in other counties, and it's working so effectively and efficiently today.
And it's great to see 20 years on now that, you know, we have over 140 schemes in DBO contracts around the country, and our role is changing. We're now validating those contracts, making sure that, you know, the water quality continues to be as high as it possibly can coming out of those treatment plants on behalf of the schemes. But also, I suppose our role in terms of the mentoring, guiding has changed, because I suppose legislation changes, the emphasis changes over time. But I suppose the core principles of what we do hasn't changed, in that, like, we're still very much the representative body for the sector, representing the group schemes at national and local level, and providing that critical mentoring, training, advisory service on a daily basis.
I began to realise so much of the global issue had to do with water.
your critical control points throughout your scheme, the catchment, the abstraction point, the treatment plant, the reservoir, the distribution network, right to the consumer's tap. What can go wrong?
In the earliest of days for the group scheme sector, individual group schemes, their task was to provide water to communities. Water that generally wasn't used for drinking purposes. It was generally used to serve farms and small businesses. So the issue of quality and wasn't as significant in the early days as it then became.
As a federation, we decided to work with our members to set up a quality assurance system.
There are some interesting stories. Again, I go back to treatment and the way treatment was being dealt with by group water schemes. I remember I went up to visit the pump house, which was in a very scenic, very beautiful area, and there was a tank of chlorine beside it. And the man that was showing me, the operator of the plant was showing me the group water scheme. He proceeded to lift the tank of chlorine. He went into the pump house and he put some chlorine into it. He said, whenever I'm up here, I'll throw in a drop. He said, sure, to keep the bugs away.
Schemes and their operators and their boards might have the enthusiasm for the scheme, the commitment to it. They didn't necessarily have the scientific or technical background that was needed.
As a federation, we knew that we needed to set up a quality assurance system to guarantee the quality of water.
Education, of course, is the proper way to go.
Again, like everything else, there was a period of evolution because the early system we developed was, well, let's be honest, schemes at that stage hadn't sufficient treatment to talk about quality assurance. They hadn't source protection in place. They hadn't the monitoring tools in the distribution network. So it really was notional for a lot of years. We took it back down from the shelf in 2008. We took the system down and developed it again, made it more. We were learning all the time ourselves and meeting with schemes and finding out the day-to-day, the operational issues arising from schemes. So we became more attuned, if you like, to what a quality assurance system needed to encompass. So in 2008, we developed a training program around quality assurance, which was really to convince schemes of the need to think about quality assurance from source to tap.
The schemes are very open to learning from each other. There's I suppose a healthy competition between schemes in that they like to be able to keep up with each other. So they always find that the workshops between schemes are hugely beneficial and very informative. The training then, we're very lucky with the standard of training consultants that we use. They're very experienced, very knowledgeable, and they're able to provide schemes with a lot of information and help them to keep up to speed with what's coming down the tracks.
Like we'll say when you have a new manager appointed, like I was appointed as a part-time manager, we were brought in and we were trained, and like you gained a lot of information and put that out in the field. It's excellent.
And indeed local authorities would often approach our development team for advice and information, and then we brought out a magazine. Local authorities used that as a source of information. Even we were further down the road in terms of what was happening in the programme than maybe many of the local authorities were, because we were dedicated to it almost 24 hours a day. We had a great team indeed at that stage. Yeah.
If you look at the legislation that's coming in now that's affecting, the new recast drinking water directive and the new drinking water regulations, the emphasis on water safety planning and effectively quality assurance in terms of monitoring that, it's the sector really sort of preempted what was coming down the tracks, and the importance of, I suppose, monitoring and having controls in place from your source, your catchment, right out through to the treatment plant, through to the consumer's tap. That was one of the, to think back in 2002 when there were so many other issues that had to be resolved, that the Federation had the foresight to be able to see that, and see that as a critical part of what it is we wanted to achieve.
The expense of keeping our water safe was often multiplied by accidental water leakage.
As a scheme, we felt we needed to meter the network on individual members to find out where water was being leaked or wasted.
It was evident to everyone involved that the amount of water that was being accounted for at the tap delivery was so much less than what was leaving the treatment plants and less again than what was leaving the sources. So there was a lot of wastage there. There was a lot of money involved in servicing that wastage. So I suppose in simple terms, just getting that wastage down, reducing the input cost and therefore being able to invest the money that was otherwise going in servicing the wastage into improving things and improving quality was particularly important. So there was a concern, was this universal metering maybe be going to use against the best interests of schemes in time? But you know, I think those early adopters of the universal metering in the very early weeks and months afterwards were able to provide data and hard information that supported the concept of metering and demonstrated that it was not just a very good thing to do, but almost an essential thing to do for the sustainable future of the sector generally.
But when schemes were built, you know, the concept of metering, of universal metering, was virtually unknown.
I would have seen treatment plants that were brand new treatment plants turned on, and there might have been, you know, UFW levels of 40, 50, even 60% in some cases, like above, you know, where it needed to be. And it was through the universal metering program. I remember going to meetings, going out to meeting committees and trying to convince them that universal metering was the essential first step in this, to try and identify where water was flowing. And meeting the opposition, you know, meeting people on the ground, and how they were so concerned that this was a big change, it was going to result in increased charge, and it was a backdoor way of just introducing charges into the sector at the time. But group schemes quickly latched on that once they could identify where the flows were, that there was so many leakage out there, and many of them were on the consumer side of the tap, but it never would have been captured unless the meter had gone in.
In the beginning, it was all about water conservation and trying to get the usage down. That was when I joined it first. That was our big mission. But once we had that tackled, we started looking at other things. Like I was very conscious that a lot of the knowledge of the network was held in the brains of about 3 individuals. And I thought, this is not good for the future. We need to put stuff in place that will safeguard this scheme, you know. So we set about digitizing everything. We mapped the network and got everything up on Google Maps, and so it's brilliant. It means now that I can get people out, contractors, and I can just link them in to the network and say, off you go, you'll find everything you need.
With ever-changing conditions in both science and nature, the National Federation of Group Water Schemes participates in specialist teams of experts who advise on how to ensure safe, clean water is delivered to every group water scheme member.
One of the working groups that we're involved in is the Pesticides in Drinking Water Working Group, which is basically involves representation from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Housing, EPA, Ishk Federation. You've got the local authorities represented on it, farming organisations represented, and mainly any organisation that's involved in the use or distribution of pesticides.
I suppose one of the mistakes made was to think that treatment of itself was enough.
The quality of the raw water, as we know, is deteriorating. So that can't be, it's too big for one scheme to take on. That has to be taken on at a national level.
Are we not putting the cart before the horse here? Should our focus not be on the source?
I felt there was a need in the academic world, the Irish higher education sector, to create a body of expertise around fresh water, around non-chemical based approaches to cleaning it, and around preventative models to ensure it didn't become polluted in the first instance.
And it is critical to understand your source. The whole element of raw water monitoring is very important, and it's kind of dealing with the problems there, then having to invest the cost in a treatment plant to address them and try and remove those problems, try and remove them at source.
People traditionally in Ireland knew the importance of protecting the well, protecting your source. That is everything. So that's where the process began. As early as 2000, 2001, the group water scheme sector was reaching out to other partners, the department, to Dundalk Institute and other academics, to Monaghan County Council. And through them, we established a pilot project based in a group water scheme here in County Monaghan, an impacted scheme, impacted source, not the worst by any means in Monaghan, moderately impacted.
be it the agricultural community, the industrial community, the residents in the area, the septic tanks, be it whatever, where the bugs were, where the contamination was, possible contamination that could come into that source.
There was kind of two phases that was broken up into two phases. So we had the kind of preliminary source protection reports that were kind of desk-based, delineating and mapping the areas around the catchment, and then the second phase was full source protection plan, which really was phase 2.
Outside of treatment plant solutions here, we need to start thinking holistically about the catchment. We can't just look at end-of-pipe solutions to resolve everything. I think to think that was the idea and the understanding back in 2005, and how that has still progressed to where we are today. We now have a policy and procedures there that, for every scheme we want to see developing integrated source protection plans over the next few years, and having that as a critical part of their water safety plan going forward, not just focusing on treatment and distribution. We're also looking at the catchment as well.
The co-benefits of source protection are in the area of biodiversity and assisting with that area, and also in the area of climate change as well.
We have looked through the past with people who were involved in the establishment of the National Federation of Group Water Schemes and assisting the group water scheme sector in its achievements. When asked, what do you see for group water schemes in the future, they said,
there'll never be the same pressures again, because the heavy lifting is done, the pipes are in the ground, the houses are connected and all that. So that allows you to concentrate on the quality of the water, the quality of the product you're putting through it,
The involvement of people locally now, however, is quite diminished. We're at the Silver Hair Brigade running the group water schemes at this stage. There are some younger people involved. However, we need to get more people involved in running the group water schemes. One of the positive things that has come out is people being employed by the group water scheme. That, to me, is brilliant, because people are employment is being provided and there's somebody there full time to run the services of the group water scheme. However, because somebody is being employed, that leads people to think, well, somebody's working on it now, therefore we don't need the same involvement. However, having the federation there, I'm hoping that will help foster people and foster people's interest and continue to keep people involved, and being the leading body and being the representative body for the group water schemes will continue to move it along.
Some of the schemes are putting solar panels in place and looking at alternative energy sources to run their plants. And it's a no-brainer, it has to be done.
I would hope in 25 years' time that we have every scheme has an integrated source protection plan, has a water safety plan, and they're using those plans to effectively, prioritise the work that they're doing on their schemes.
So it was a simple message that I think that every scheme needs to learn. Once you know how your source responds to climatic conditions, you are far, far better prepared. In other words, you're not waiting until the last minute of a drought when things are getting really desperate before you implement water reduction in the distribution network, before informing your members. Look, think before you waste water. We're not in trouble just yet, but we could be if these climatic conditions continue. This is absolutely key to managing water supplies in the age of climate change and climate events. The type of climate events we've already been seeing, where sources can fluctuate quite dramatically in the period of days, weeks and months. We need to be ready for that. So there's no lesson, in my view, more important than that lesson.
Would probably be in the future, and even today, are coming under stress because of the climate change, whether it's flooding or droughts. And I think that'll be a huge challenge for schemes, and that's why I think that the rationalisation would be extremely important, where maybe one source is damaged or whatever and a neighbouring scheme can join that. I think climate change is a much bigger challenge than any of us realise at this stage. We hear a lot about it in the media and we're aware of it, but I think that'll be a big job for the Federation to help people to understand what it is, because prevention obviously is better than cure. So if we can plan in advance to protect sources and be people, but we must bring our people with us. And maybe one final thing I might make a comment in terms of the composition of group water schemes. And I'll take our own scheme for example. We'd have over 1,000 members, households, but only 320 of those are farmers. So 2/3 of the members of the Devon Group Water Scheme are people that built houses in rural Ireland. I call them urbanites living in rural Ireland. And sometimes when we talk about threats to sources and pollution, we're inclined to think farmers all the time. But in fact, those 2/3 of people with their gardens and their sprays that are lashing on hedges that are not being kept, we're doing more damage to biodiversity maybe than all the farmers put together. It's as equally challenging. And I think if we can get that message across, that everybody's involved in this in terms of protecting the environment and protecting the source, then I think farmers will breathe a little easier. And we've got to help farmers. There's no point in saying to someone, well, you cannot farm in that field because it's adjacent to the street. There's got to be some level of support for that farmer. And I think schemes can do that. They've got reserves, and they should put something forward for that out of their own resources in order to assist that farm that is a threat to the local source. Otherwise, that source gets polluted. That's going to cost a fortune to treat it down the treatment plant.
I definitely think we're going to see further consolidation in the sector. I think we have to accept that you know the challenges that are there for schemes today, particularly smaller schemes, can they continue to meet those challenges? I think they can, but it has to be part of a bigger picture, and in terms of amalgamation, rationalisation, where those opportunities exist, have to be latched onto.
Well, I suppose looking back to 25 years, personally I'm involved in this scheme for 40 years at this stage, and it's the community aspect of the thing that you really get encouragement out of, and nobody is any better off by running a group water scheme, let me tell you. But at the same time, you're helping out the community. It's great satisfaction to look back over them years and know that you've left something behind you. This fabulous building in front of us here and new reservoir on top of the hill up there. Like, what else would you be at really? Only working for your community if you're not playing football or something. So I feel the importance that it's the community spirit that gets work done, and we can leave something behind us for the next generation to hopefully look after for us.
The issue of clean water supply is always going to be about more than treatment. It's about environmental management, it's about biodiversity, it's about habitat restoration, and it's about our relationship to the environment.
Schemes need to start identifying people within the community, people with technological skills, people with heart, people with knowledge about source protection, environmental heads, the people with different skills, people with financial skills, and say, we want you to come in, and your role as a board member, as a committee member, will be oversight to manage this scheme on behalf of this community, so that this community continues to enjoy and to own its own water supply, not just 25 years from now, but centuries from now.
We were the bad boy of Europe, and it took the setting up of the National Federation of Group Water Schemes to give quality water to everybody in rural Ireland, and it continues to this day, and I have no doubt in 25 years' time it will be the same. Quality water provided to the good people of rural Ireland, who deserve no less.